All right, let's check out the solution. So we'll start off with a little bit of some code reading. Noah, could you start us off? Could you do lines 10 and 11, please?
Button tag.
Opening button tag.
Opening button tag with the class attribute. Being assigned to a string. With the text inside and closing button tag. Line 11, opening dialog tag.
Perfect. Thank you. Trey, we'll go to you. Could you please do 12 and 13?
So on line 12, we have the opening H2 tag with text content and the closing H2 tag. And on line 13, we have the opening div tag with a string modal actions being assigned to the attribute class.
Perfect. Yep. Thank you. Line 14, there's an opening button tag with a class attribute being assigned a string, some text content, and then a closing tag for the button. And then on line 15, there's a closing tag for a div element. And then on line 16, there's a closing tag for the dialog element. Let's take a look at some of our CSS for this one. Rukaya, could you do 1 through 3, please?
On line 1, we have a universal selector. We have a new CSS rule set selecting the universal selector.
Yep.
Okay. On line 2, we have the box sizing property being assigned the value of border box. On line 3, we have the closing curly brace.
Awesome. Thank you. Caroline, could you do 5 through 7?
On line 5, there's a CSS selector for the body element.
There's a new CSS rule set selecting the body element.
Okay. And then opening curly brace. On line 6, there's a font family property with the value of sans serif, and on line 7, a closing curly brace.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sorry, I got some chili in my eye.
Oh, you good? You okay?
So I'm okay.
Noah, could you do 9 through 11?
There's a new CSS rule set dialog, selecting dialog, selecting a dialog
Element.
with the border color property.
On line 10.
On line 10, transparent values assigned to a property border color. And line 11, closing curly braces.
Awesome. Trey, could you do 13 to 15?
So on line 13, we have a new CSS rule set, and forgive me, you're gonna have to tell me how to read this again. I apologize.
Yeah, I forget if this is a pseudo class. When there's 1 dot or 2 dots, I always get confused if it's a pseudo class or a pseudo element. I think this is a pseudo element. So I think the way that we would read this is on line 13, there's a new CSS rule set for the dialog selector with the pseudo element backdrop.
Okay, so on line 13, there's a new CSS rule set for the dialog element. Is that what you said?
Yep.
With the pseudo. I'm sorry, did you say class or element?
I think pseudo element. Let me
pseudo element
look it up
of
just
backdrop.
It is a pseudo element.
It's a pseudo element? Perfect. Yeah. Then pseudo element.
Thank you. And then we have the opening curly brace, and on line 14, we have the background color property being assigned the color. And on line 15, we have a closing curly brace.
Awesome. Thank you, Trey.
Holy great.
Rukaya.
What is the difference between pseudo class and pseudo element?
A pseudo class monitors or changes like the styling of an element based off of a state. So for instance, like hover, this is a pseudo class because it's modifying the state of what happens with this dialog. A pseudo element is actually like an element. So in the backdrop, it's almost like there's like an actual like backdrop element. So I'm actually applying the styling to an element, not a class. The most common ones you'll see is after or before. And essentially there you can use that. We'll pull it up after MDN. I think before had a better. So like, what if you wanted to like apply like maybe some styling right before an element? Like in this case, they added little emojis. So like these little photos, then you could use the before pseudo element. So it's almost like that there's kind of like a fake, like little actual HTML element that exists like before or after an element. So when we're targeting the pseudo element, we're kind of targeting those elements.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So with the backdrop, if we let's open up this HTML file real quick.
Oh, what's backdrop?
I'll show you right now. Oh. Make sure we set this to make sure we're back to where it should be. Yeah. So you see how when I open up my dialog, you see how in the DOM tree there's this colon backdrop. So that's what it's technically oh, why did the projector stop? There we go. So it's almost like there's kind of like this hidden little element that exists in the DOM tree, and I'm applying my styling to that element, which is how I'm applying that background color. So the backdrop only exists on dialogues. It's an only modal dialogues. So if this wasn't a modal dialogue, then I wouldn't have the backdrop. But when I have a modal dialogue, it's a.
Is it like a background screen with like?
You think about it like that, yeah. In this case, it's like a built-in element so that I can apply styling to the whole screen. Because usually when you get a pop-up, you'll dim the screen behind to kind of draw focus to the pop-up and to kind of symbolize to the user that they can't do anything in the background. And so that's what that backdrop does. It's just a built-in element to kind of apply something to the background. Trey?
And if I understood you correctly, you said that was built into HTML?
The backdrop pseudo element?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, but only built into the dialogue element. So like a div does not have a backdrop, for instance. Only a dialogue has a backdrop. But the one that I was talking about earlier, the before and the after, every HTML element would have a before and an after. So there are some pseudo elements like before and after that every element would have. But in this case, like the backdrop one, that's only for the dialogue element.
Thanks, Sean.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Let's go on back. And then Rakai, I think it was your turn to code read as well. So could you do 17 to 19, please? Oh, let me go on back. There we go.
On line 17, there's a new CSS rule set selecting the H2 element, followed by the opening curly brace. On line 18, the margin bottom property has been assigned the value of 3 rem. On line 19, there's a closing curly brace.
Perfect. Thank you. Caroline, could you do 21 through 24?
On line 21, there is a new CSS style rule set selecting the button element with an opening curly brace. On line 22, there's the color property with the value of white. On line 23, the border property with value of none. And on line 24, the border radius property with 0.25 red value.
Perfect. Thank you. Noah, finish this one off. 25 through 28.
The property padding has a value of 0.5 rem and 2 for the padding. The top bottom has 0.5 rem and right left has 2 rem. The cursor property has a pointer value. Well, which is it changes the behavior of the pointer, right?
Yes. So if I were to, you see how my cursor right here is just like a normal arrow. as soon as I hover over the button, you can see it kind of changes to like a little Mickey Mouse hand kind of with the, yeah.
To line 30, right?
28.
20, and the font size property with 1.5, right?
Mhm.
And box shadow, property with, oh, wow, 0.2 pixel or 3 pixel, what is box shadow?
Box shadow is how you can add a shadow kind of around an element.
So 0 and 2 pixel, 3 pixel, 0 is it top, bottom, left, right?
No, one is controlling the like where the box shadow appears, like how
Oh,
much
yeah.
over. One's controlling the darkness of the box shadow, one's controlling, so. Awesome, thank you. Trey, could you do 31 through 33, please?
So on line 31, we have a new CSS rule set with the button element with the pseudo class focus.
Yep.
And the opening curly brace. And on line 32, we have the outline property being set to value of none. And on line 33, we have a closing curly brace.
Awesome, thank you. Ukaya, could you do 35 through 37?
On line 35, there's a new CSS rule set selecting the button element with a class of open modal with an opening curly brace. On line 36, the background color property has the value of an RGB. Do I need to read it out?
No, you could just say like an RGB color or something. Yep.
Okay. On line 37, there's a closing curly brace.
Perfect. Thank you. Caroline, 39 through 41.
On line 39, there's a new CSS style rule set selecting the class of dismiss modal on the button elements.
We could do that. I would probably say selecting the button element with the class dismiss modal.
Okay, the button element with the dismiss model class.
Uh-huh.
And an opening curly brace. On line 40, there is a background color with the value of color red. On line 41, there's a closing curly brace.
Perfect. Yeah.
This is regarding the CSS, so the hover, the colon hover, is it changes the, well, does a hover changes the behavior of the object when you hover over?
It changes the styles of an element.
The styles of an element. And active, it's when you click.
Yes.
And when the stop and click goes back to the normal state.
Yeah.
But what about focus? What's that?
Focus is when it has focus. It's like when you click into an input.
So when you click on the box, then
yes, so if you go to a form, and if you've ever clicked inside of a field, and that field has like a blue border around it.
Yeah, that it shows you that you've
because
clicked on it.
when I tried to put, I put red color, it's always red. Like, I don't know why it is.
You see how when I clicked into the input, there's blue around?
So what did
So you can see
just
the input is not focused, right? As soon as I click into it, you see how there's like blue around it?
Can I see on the CSS?
I didn't change anything. This is just built in.
Okay, so
All I did was add an input.
if you go to CSS,
I did not add any CSS. All I did was
Yeah.
it's already built in.
yeah, I just saw a button for focus
Yes,
outline.
so it's saying when a button is focused, apply those styles. So when I click into an input, something is focused. So if a button receives focus, then it would apply those styles.
And the property outline none, so it doesn't apply anything.
Yes, exactly. The outline is removing the focus. So if we were to, I just close the file, let's open it back up. So let's get rid of the, so let's say outline 2 pixels solid yellow. That's hard to see, but you see how there's a yellow border kind of around the button up there? So you can see it disappeared, it's there, it disappeared, it's there. You see that?
So when you go
I can make it a lot bigger, 12 pixels.
yes,
You see the yellow?
yes.
gone. It's there, it's gone. So focus is that element is focused. So I am currently on that element.
Currently on the element.
Yeah.
Okay.
So people that with accessibility, so if like what if I don't have hands? And I don't think hands maybe because you still need to use a keyboard. Maybe I don't have a right hand and I only have a left hand, so I don't use a mouse. And so then what I may do to go through a web page is I'll use tab. And what tab will do is it'll focus throughout different elements on a page, and that's how I can actually navigate through the page. So if you hit tab and shift tab, it'll go through the navigable. So a lot like people will sometimes go through web pages. Yeah.
Like if I have a problem with the mouse, I
Yeah, and you sit there and you tab through stuff. So focus is if I was tabbing through my page, as soon as I tabbed onto an element and that element is now the current element I'm on, focus would apply styles to that.
Go down the element.
That's important.
That's a outline.
They're really big for accessibility.
Outline for 2 pixel. Okay,
That's just what I set it to. You can change it to whatever you want. That's
Yeah.
just what, yeah.
2 pixels something.
Awesome, but let's move on to the TypeScript. I know we didn't code read that, but we just have that. Let's take a look at the actual TypeScript. So what was the last one to read? I think it was so Caroline. Could you do 1 through 3, please?
Okay, on line 1, there's a query selector method of the document object selecting being called with one argument a string, and that is being assigned to the constant variable open modal. On line 2, the query selector method of the document object is being called with one argument a string, and that is being assigned to the constant variable dismiss modal. On line 3, there's a query selector method of the document object being called with one argument a dialog, and that is being assigned to the constant variable dialog.
Perfect, thank you. Line 5, there's an if statement with a conditional expression checking for not open modal, and then we instantiate a new error and throw it. On line 6 and 7, we have if statements checking for not dismiss modal or not dialog respectively, and then they are going to be instantiating errors and throwing them. Rukaya?
Instead of writing this in 3 lines, we could have used the or operator, right?
Yes, so in this case, I could have also done the open, not $, open modal or $, dismiss modal. So I could have also done it in one as well, or you could have broken it up. It just kind of depends on what you're checking for. In this case, it would have been the same. What we were talking about the other day. So if we were using and, well, if we were going to do and, then obviously we would have to do them all at once because we're checking to make sure all of them existed at once rather than just one. But yeah, either way. And then Noah, could you do 9 through 11?
9 through 11. Okay. There's a add event listener method of the object open model. I forgot the line 9. Well, with an argument string.
Being called with how many arguments?
Being called with 2 arguments. One is a string click. The type of the event. And a callback function. Callback arrow function, right? Yeah. On line 10.
Any parameters? Any parameters on that? No parameters. Okay.
Is it no parameters because object is a global right now, right?
No, I just don't have any parameters.
There's no event there.
I'm not passing anything into the function, so I don't have any parameters.
But there's an event trigger, right?
I could, in theory, I could have event. So I could have done event, but I'm not using event at all. So you can see I'm actually going to get an error, and then it says, "Hey, you declared it, but it's never used." So if I have code that's there but it's never used, why is it there? So in this case, if I don't plan on using event, then I'll delete it. But if I want to go and use it later on, I could just go and I could add it back.
Yeah. Line 10, show model method of the dialog object. is being called without any argument.
Perfect. Yep. Awesome. Thank you. And Trey, 13 through 15.
So on line 13, we have the add event listener method is being called by the dismissal object with 2 arguments, a string and a method.
Callback function.
I'm sorry, a callback function with no parameters.
Uh-huh.
We have the opening curly brace, and on line 14, we have the close method of the dialog object is being called with no arguments. And on line 15, we close everything up.
Awesome. Perfect.
Yeah, it's a CSS class, CSS question, sorry. So in the styles.css at line 31, 35, and 39.
Yep.
You can see like button, so at line 35 and 39, you can see like button, open model is the class inside the button tag. Right?
I'm saying all buttons with a class open modal.
So is it similar to, it's not similar to when you put dot open model alone.
It is. It's just now, if I did dot open modal,
this-
I'm saying any element that has this class. But with the button, I'm saying only buttons. So you can see my
Only
selector.
button with.
Yeah,
oh,
it says button class open modal. But if I were to just do open modal without the button, you can see it says element. So any HTML element.
Oh,
So
okay.
they're similar, but they're not. This one is, I'm specifically making sure it is a button.
And then like small.
Yeah, Caroline?
I had a question about the JavaScript.
Yep.
So for example, if I wanted to use somebody, for example, like if the person who was going to open the modal
Mm-hmm.
and show the modal had to pass in a parameter of a pin of some sort to open that, then I would have, for example, the parameter, I could put like pin. So then the person who wants to open that modal would have to enter a pin to open it? Or what would I use the parameters for, these callback functions? Because I'm just thinking of an example, like in this situation, like what kind of
Right here?
parameter could I have?
This one?
Yeah, yes, for the parameters, what kind of parameter could I have?
Event
Just event?
only. Here. Yeah. But what if, for instance, I had page 2 or so let's just say I had a nav bar, right? And inside of that nav bar, I had a nav link. And let's say about link. So about link dot add event listener. And when that clicks, I want to swap pages. But the page that I want to swap to is the about page. I couldn't do this. Anybody remember why I couldn't do this?
Because you're actually not.
Oh yeah, it's a callback, there's no return.
Not that there's no return, Rukaya.
Because it needs to be a callback function, and that's not a function, right?
It is a function, it's just I'm calling a function. And so this is passing a reference to the function. This is immediately calling the function. And so if I were to do this, well, then I can't pass an argument into it because it thinks that I'm going to call it. So how could I pass an argument into this function? I would need another function. So then I would create a callback function, and then I would call swap pages, and then I would pass in the parameter like that. So like so. So as far as your parameters go for these callback functions, you only really ever would put event. Because these callback functions only ever get ran or called by the add event listener. So you can never pass anything into them. Only JavaScript can, and it will only pass the event. But you may call other functions inside of your event handler, and then you would pass data into those.
Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Just
Yeah.
question, remember you said that event argument is like a global, so it's. So we even if we don't put event, there's gonna be like a.
There is a global event object, This is creating my own local version, but they're not the same. They're still different. So even if I don't have it, there still technically is a global event object, but I don't want to use it because I cannot guarantee that that global event object is this event. It could be a completely different other event. The only way that I can guarantee is by using the actual argument, the parameter.
Okay.
So we'll check out the quiz questions. Get rid of this form that I created. Rukaya, can you tell me what is the dialogue element used for?
It is to create pop-up dialogues or modal windows.
Yeah, exactly. So it's used to create pop-ups, whether that's a modal dialogue, a non-modal dialogue, just anytime we ever want to show some sort of a pop-up to a user, that's when we can use that dialogue element. Caroline, how can I display a modal dialogue?
By show modal method.
So I can use the show modal method to display a dialogue. Noah, how could I hide a modal dialogue?
We can use show model.
Show modal opens. How would I close it?
So hide is closing.
Close. Close is the method.
I thought like minimize it.
Yes, we are minimizing, but what is the method that I would call to minimize? The method's called close.
Oh, close. I thought it's we're using show model because so
Show modal opens it. Show modal shows it, but in order to close it, I use the close method.
hiding. Okay.
Yeah. So how do we hide a modal dialogue? We use the
Close.
close method.
Okay.
And Trey, what is the difference between the show modal and the show methods?
The show modal method displays the dialog box as a modal, and just the show method displays just the dialog box.
Exactly. So the show modal will show the dialog box as an actual modal, whereas in the show, it's just going to show a dialog box. Pretty much the difference between what a modal is and what not a modal is it restricts focus. So for instance, right now, when I click on open modal, I cannot interact with the background. I cannot click on anything in the background. If I were to try to use tab, we can't see it because I removed the outline. Let me add the outline back. So if I'm using tab, you can see the only thing that I'm tabbing into is the modal. When I press tab again and it goes away, it's like tabbing to my browser. It's not tabbing to the page. It's tabbing only to that modal box right here. But if I were to change this to show rather than show modal, and I'm just going to do this in the JavaScript because I don't want to have to worry about the compiling. But now I'm using show instead of show modal. First, you can see my styles are going to break because I don't have that backdrop. So if you remember earlier, I was applying the background color to the or the colon backdrop, that pseudo element. Well, since I'm not using a modal box anymore, I don't have the backdrop. So my styles are already broken. But now you can see as I hit tab, I'm focusing between multiple things. Even though my dialog box is open, I'm still able to tab and interact with things in the background. So I'm still able to interact with this button. Whereas then if I go back to the show modal, I can only interact with that button. So those are the differences between what is a modal and what's a not. A modal forces your user to have to deal with that pop-up before they can deal with anything else in the background. Whereas in just show, a normal dialog box will just display a pop-up, but you're not forcing the user to have to deal with it. It's like sometimes, like if you've ever seen like cookies pop-ups, but they're at like the bottom of the page and they don't really like get in the way. They're just kind of there. Sometimes you hit them, but then you have other ones where like you literally can't use the website until you hit like accept or deny. Those are two different types of pop-ups. One was a modal and one wasn't. Trey?
I actually looked that up. Is it okay to remember this as thinking of modal as locking it down where the user is restricted to only that?
Yeah.
Or is, oh, okay.
Yeah, I think that, no, I think that's a good way to think about it. Is a modal means you're forcing the user to deal with this before they can deal with anything else. A non-modal, just a normal dialog box, is just some sort of a pop-up. Any other questions about modals? Awesome. The dialogue element is actually relatively new. I think that this only got introduced within the last 2 to 3 years. So a lot of modals, you used to actually have to build them manually with like divs, and you'd have to do a lot more CSS and JavaScript to actually get them to show. So dialogue is a relatively newer addition, but it's really handy. You can see I just have a method. I just got to call the method, and then it shows and it doesn't. And it's also better for accessibility purposes. A big problem with modal is accessibility, and it's because of what we were just talking about with Trey, was the locking the focus. You can get into a lot of accessibility problems if you don't lock the user in, because if I'm blind and I'm not locked into dealing with this pop-up, and then like I'm tabbing on in the background, the screen reader is going to keep reading all the content in the background. And it'd be kind of confusing if it's like reading the paragraph in the background when I have this big old pop-up kind of facing. So there can be big accessibility problems with pop-ups, which is why using all these built-in elements and tools that have available is the best way to kind of help us handle those. Awesome. Anything else before we move on? All right, well, let me stop our share, stop the recording.